Hello and welcome back to the show. This is Blackstone Joe and you're listening to another episode of Slick Talk. Today we're going to answer a question we got on the Twitter account. It's a good one about oil filtration and manufacturer recommendations and if you really are safe to change the filter, not every oil change, but every other change. It's a good question. I'm glad we got in. And again, social media, it's a great way to interact with us and let us know what you want us to cover. But before we get into the topic, we have a little bit of a what's happening. We're coming up on, well, I guess this episode is recorded on, not necessarily going to be released. We've been recording a little bit ahead of schedule here. And, we're right about at the year mark of the you-know-what since everything changed. And I'm not here to inform you that it's been a crazy year, but I hope everyone out there is doing well. Interested to know what you've been filling the time with during this past year. For me personally, it's been a lot of cooking, especially as of late. I'm actually cooking. I'm not just like assembling a bowl of ramen, which isn't to say there's anything wrong with doing that, but I feel like, I don't know, maybe we need to establish like a baseline rule for what counts as cooking. And I think maybe that's like if you incorporate like fresh herbs or something, or maybe you had to, I don't know, maybe you had to actually plan what you were going to do. Let's go with that. If you had to make a plan, say, all right, I have a few different like things going on the stove at once and I have to worry about getting, say like last night, for example, I had to make sure I cooked the shrimp at just the right time, take that off the heat, finish the pasta, then work on the steak, let the steak rest, then put the bread in the oven. And yeah, I mean, it was awesome. I mean, I was glad I did it and it took a while. So let's say cooking is only really a thing that you can like brag about doing if it took some planning, took some prep, and you couldn't just do it at will. It kind of required a little bit of little something extra. That's not the only thing that's happening as of late. I recently talked about moving and how much I hate moving. So naturally, guess what I did? I moved again. Not to a new residence, I should say. A new area within Blackstone. I think I've moved like 5 times. That might be the running count. I like new spaces and being able to kind of make everything new, when you're working in the same place for years. I think it's good to kind of liven it up however you can. So that's what I've been trying to do. And sure enough, I found another spot on the grounds where I can set up shop and I'm going to paint in there. I'm kind of excited about that. Going to get my feng shui in order, get some good decoration, the whole nine. So I'm excited about that. Going to come in on a Saturday, blare some music when no one's there, just hang out and enjoy myself. So I'm looking forward to it. All right, let's get into this. So oil filtration, Hondas. Well, not necessarily just Hondas, but that's where the question originated. So specifically, we had Carl reach out on Twitter and say, has Blackstone Joe done an episode on oil filtration? My Honda says to change the filter every other oil change. Is that typical these days? Do people do that? Does Blackstone keep track of that? Any opinions or data on this? So I have opinions. And I have a little bit of data. The reason I don't have a fully developed, peer-reviewed, tough as nails analysis is because most of the time people aren't so generous as to let us know, everything about their maintenance. I'm sure there's a lot of instances where people have not changed the filter and didn't bother to mention. We have some instances where they did tell us. It's spotty when you have to rely on customer information. Sometimes we're lucky to know the exact engine model. So I want to say that it's tricky to compile an absolute concrete list of every single time someone has not changed the filter and sampled. But we do have a few instances I want to break down a little bit as far as people, not changing the filter when they change the oil, letting us know, and then I can give an overview of those results, fairly broad stroke. But I will address one main component of this query, which is this typical? The idea of not changing the filter every oil change. Do people do this? I will say industry standard, it's not unusual for a manufacturer to say that you can use the filter for more than one fill. And it's something that requires a leap of faith for a lot of people. I mean, even going more than 3,000 miles between oil changes, that still requires a leap of faith for a lot of folks out there. Some people are looking to even go beyond what the manufacturer recommends, though. Some people are looking to do whatever the label on the oil says to do. I was looking at a sample yesterday and someone said AMS oil says 25 thou is fine, so I would like to test that. So everyone's got a different comfort zone, and when it comes to running the filter for more than one oil run, it's pretty uncommon for people to tell us that they took that leap of faith, a trust fall, whatever you want to call it. But I will say that it doesn't surprise me to find word of manufacturers like Honda saying to feel free to use a filter for more than one run, because it's pretty rare that I see a high insolubles level. So before I go any further, I'll break down what insolubles are and why they matter in this case. So for those that don't know, insolubles are solids that form as the oil is exposed to heat, use, and blow-by. You will always have insolubles. It's not a problem. It is the oil filter's job to keep them in check. They will become problematic if they surpass a certain amount. 0.6% is fairly high. So when I say 0.6%, I'm talking about 0.6% of the sample. So if you have a lot of solids, they can turn the oil abrasive. They can cause wear. If you have a lot of insolubles, here's the deal. That can also relate to other issues. So, the oil filter wasn't able to keep the solids in check, but maybe they formed so rapidly due to contamination, excess heat, so on and so forth. But insolubles are the key in determining if your filter can stay in use or not. So if you send us a sample and you have not changed the filter, please tell us that you haven't, because that way we can keep it in mind, and insolubles are low, then running that filter longer is a safe bet. Now, here's where it gets tricky for everyone. Mileage. A lot of people have different ideas of what an oil run is. So I can't give you this across the board, run the filter for your XYZ mileage. For some people, 3,000 miles is a standard oil run. Not the same for many. And it really varies depending on the manufacturer. So I just want to bring up a couple of examples of instances that might surprise some people. We had a 6.6 liter Duramax. I just pulled a few instances here to kind of illustrate this, put this idea of insolubles and mileage into context. This particular customer had 0.2% insolubles after 7,000 miles of oil use. And in this case, we were glad to let them know that they could run that oil filter longer. Before I started looking at used oil samples for a living, I probably would have been fairly floored by the idea of 7,000 miles on oil, let alone keeping that filter in use. That would probably shock me. It might shock a lot of you out there. And this isn't just a diesel thing. I just pulled up an EJ25 Subaru, for those that don't know. It's always a fun game of like, what can I say that I assume everyone listening to this show knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's hard to know for sure. So Subaru EJ25, really popular engine. See a lot of them just like those 6.6 liter Duramaxes. Obviously very different engines from top to bottom. So here we had an EJ25 only accumulating 0.3% insolubles after 8,000 miles of oil use. So I can pull up more instances, but regardless of how gaudy the mileage is, how low the insolubles are, with so many other things, and it's the same with oil filtration and insolubles, this is a game of building your trends, and it is also a recommendation on a case-by-case basis. It would be wrong for me to say, all right, look at this data from a EJ25. With that, feel free to go as long as they did, even if you are the owner of an EJ25, because use matters so much. What you're asking that engine to do. Oxidized solids may form quicker for you than they do for someone else, not due to a problem, simply due to the use the engine sees. So as with so many other things, I would urge folks to sample the oil change interval they are accustomed to. Let that be your starting point. Hang on to the filter. Send us the sample and we'll let you know where insolubles and of course the rest of the engine stands. How does it look as far as the accumulation of solids? If it's me and I'm looking at a sample and I see insolubles are well below the 0.6% limit and I see a lot of good news elsewhere, then running that filter longer is certainly a safe bet. And we'll just keep building these intervals, if you want to extend, we'll just keep building them gradually because, believe me, the gradual approach is best. Making sure that not just the filter, but the rest of the engine is keeping up well. We're looking out for any potential signs of contamination, so on and so forth. Doesn't hurt to take a gradual approach. So start off with your baseline interval. Your baseline interval, if you're searching for guidelines on that, follow what the manufacturer sets out in the manual. Especially if you're under warranty, that's a safe way to do it. And then we'll see where things stand. Hang on to your filter, keep that in place, and then if it needs to be changed, we'll be sure to direct you to do so. Now, I'm sure a lot of people out there are wondering about bypass filters and whether or not bypass filtration alters any of this. Say you have a bypass setup and you're wondering, does that alter anything as far as our filter change recommendation? And here's the thing about bypass filters. First of all, we have nothing against them. They are a great way to keep insolubles lower for a longer period of time because when you have a bypass setup, it increases the oil capacity, and then all of a sudden you can keep insolubles lower, potentially for a longer interval. But don't let a bypass filter kind of trick you into, I would say, a false sense of complacency. Now, while it can keep insolubles lower for a longer period, it's not necessarily this power-up measure like you're in a video game and it suddenly turns you invincible for, XYZ mileage. Still take that gradual approach and see how things are going because, again, one engine's way of producing insolubles at a certain rate is bound to be different from others. And while a bypass filtration setup is certainly not going to hurt things, it's still tricky to know exactly without having samples to reference, without having some history on the engine. It's still tricky to know outright what you're going to be able to get out of it. So proceed with a gradual approach. And I would certainly believe that a bypass setup is going to help. But when it comes down to knowing exactly how much, we're just going to have to rely on the data. We're going to have a trend established to have the utmost confidence to just throw out these really ambitious numbers. Just because I look at one particular customer, like today, I'll indulge you a little bit. I looked at a sample. This wasn't even from a big rig. I believe it was just a pickup, and it was going like 30,000 miles with ease, and, low wear, low insolubles, everything looking great. But there's probably a lot that goes into these numbers looking great. There's a lot behind the scenes, especially maybe operationally speaking. We're probably talking about an engine that's not experiencing a lot of really strenuous use. A lot of careful maintenance that takes credit for these results. It's not simply, well, they have a bypass set up or they have this, that, and then they don't have to worry about anything else, And the other thing that was cool about this instance, where I saw such phenomenal results, both with insolubles and everything else, they had a lot of samples in the file. They took time to build really strong data points. And when I say really strong, we get to see year-long trends where we can see, all right, this is what it looks like in the winter when there's more idling due to the colder weather. And here's what it looks like when maybe they are putting the truck through its paces. And here's, we have these windows into the truck's life, what the engine's being asked to do, that help us make informed recommendations. So circling back to the initial question, kind of putting a little bit of a bow on this. Is it typical these days to change the filter every other oil change? I would have to say no, because so many people probably don't want to take that leap of faith. But with that being said, I certainly believe that a lot of engines are capable of this, and a lot of people just haven't tested it yet. They haven't taken that leap and seen if it's doable. But it does not surprise me one bit that manufacturers are advising this as something that your engine's fully capable of doing. It does not surprise me. It's fairly rare that I see a high insolubles level. And usually when folks send in their samples, I'm looking at a pretty low insolubles level in general. And as for whether or not Blackstone keeps track of it, we can only keep track of these instances as often as people tell us. So if you would like us to track data like this for you, when you're filling out the slip that comes with the kit, let us know exactly what you got going on. Hey, I'm trying to run this filter experiment. I'm trying to see if it can stay in use. Please advise, and we will. And if we can build trends for you, and not only yourself, but other folks who are tracking the same thing, we can eventually build some sort of comparison. Otherwise, we're kind of left looking at samples and just making broad stroke statements like oil filtration looks great. Wear looks great. You're doing good things here. It ends up being a little general. But if you dial in exactly what you need out of that sample, that report, such as wanting to run the filter for more than one oil run, we'll be more than happy to help. All right, that brings today's topic to a close. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. And again, if you like what you're hearing, please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. If you want to send in any topics, please don't hesitate to reach out to our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I would love to hear from you. So once again, this is Blackstone Joe. Thank you for listening.